Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. The sound of the water pump clicking off was the only real noise outside of the radio. The house was already quiet before I turned it on, but now it felt too quiet. No birds, no wind in the trees yet, just the flat tone of a weather band signal, followed by a man reading off a list of shelter-in-place advisories for counties I wasn't used to hearing grouped together. I kept the volume low and waited for more. This wasn't how I expected the day to start. We were supposed to be canning beef and potatoes. Anna had laid out everything last night. Pressure canner, wide-mouth jars, the new rings she ordered from a farm supply site. I'd sharpened the knives while Mark replaced the charging rack in the hallway. That was our rhythm. We had it down. We were the kind of family who prepared for hurricane season like other people prepared for the 4th of July. We didn't panic. We ran drills. This house was built to take damage. Poured concrete walls, steel roof with storm anchors, blackout shutters on every window, even the skylight. If the forecast showed a Category 2 or higher spinning out of the Gulf, we'd lock everything down, switch to generator hours, and ride it out with shelf-stable food and 300 gallons of water. But the radio didn't mention weather this time. There were too many pauses between statements. Too many strange phrases. Emergency medical service diversion in multiple counties. Hospitals closed to public intake due to safety concerns. Authorities requesting residents not travel to major facilities unless facing immediate loss of life. The voice reading the alerts wasn't local either. Sounded like it came from somewhere in Virginia or Maryland, patched through a relay. Anna stepped into the room holding one of the greenhouse thermometers, paused at the sound, then glanced at me. We didn't need to say anything yet. We both just listened. Another advisory came through. Same tone, different wording. Then a fragment of someone else's voice, breaking into the relay for a second. Something about trauma patients turning violent. No context. Then static. I shut off the stove. The pressure canner wouldn't be sealed for another 6 minutes, but I didn't want a fire risk if something started happening fast. Anna nodded and started covering the jars with clean towels. Mark asked if the power grid was down again. I told him no. He didn't press. The decision to switch to lockdown protocol wasn't made out loud. I walked to the utility room and started pulling in the secondary fuel drum. Anna closed the upper vents and latched the storm locks. Mark went to check the solar battery levels and wrote the numbers down in the logbook. We didn't call it panic. We called it a drill. That made it easier to follow the list. I knew we wouldn't get much more real information from the news. It's always like that when something big starts. Radio gets quiet, or full of the wrong voices. But I needed to know if this was just a local thing. I called Ron down the ridge. He lived close to town, worked nights for public utilities, usually had a handle on emergencies. I asked if he'd heard anything weird. Ron's voice was low. Said there was a wreck near the edge of town last night. Some kind of chemical spill at first, but then someone on his crew got attacked trying to help. Not mugged, attacked, bitten. He didn't say infected people. He didn't joke. He just said bitten, hard enough that bone was showing. And the guy didn't even scream until he tried to stand. He told me he wasn't going back into town again unless the National Guard showed up. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't call anyone else right away. I sat with it for a minute. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. We always imagined outbreak scenarios in theory. I read enough books and watched enough prepper channels to know how people say it'll go. But this wasn't a red alert on every screen. It was quiet, confused, too vague to make people act, too weird to ignore. We had enough fuel for weeks. Water tanks were full. The manual tower could supply gravity-fed lines to the kitchen and greenhouse without needing the pump. The raised beds were mostly squash and beans, nothing we could eat today, but the pantry held 3 months of canned meat, dried goods, and shelf-stable milk. It wasn't about food, it was about time. If something was spreading, I wanted to see how fast. Mark helped me mount the tripwire bells at the edges of the property. We'd used them before for raccoons. Now we adjusted the lines to sit higher. Mid-shin, human height. I added zip-tied glow sticks to the junction posts in case we needed to ID where a breach came from during the night. I didn't say why I wanted them. He figured it out without asking. Anna moved the medical supplies from the upstairs bathroom into the mudroom. We'd already cleared space for that if the day ever came. Sterile gloves, gauze, pressure wraps, bleach solution in pre-mixed bottles. A small portable light was mounted over the table. I checked the flashlight drawer. 12 rechargeables, 3 solar headlamps, all topped off. That evening, I tried one more time to tune into something useful. The local weather band was down, which wasn't uncommon, but the state emergency repeater kept cutting in with a strange burst pattern. Half a sentence, then 2 minutes of silence. Finally, just before 9, a new message came through. It was a loop. Remain indoors. Shelter in place. Avoid hospitals and emergency rooms. If exposed to infected persons, quarantine and report to medical authorities. If symptoms develop, isolate and wait for assistance. That was the first time the word showed up. Infected. Not sick. Not patients. Infected. Anna paused halfway through resealing the window locks. We both heard it clearly. I turned off the radio and made sure all the blackout curtains were drawn. I didn't want to keep the light on too long in case someone was already watching. I sat in the kitchen with the shotgun across my knees, not because I thought anything would happen tonight, but because it felt wrong not to. The house was too quiet. I kept listening for movement outside. The wind never picked up. On day 2, I woke up before sunrise and stepped outside with the bolt-action 22. It wasn't loaded yet. I just needed to walk the perimeter and check for signs of movement. The ground was damp, no clear prints, bells undisturbed. The woods were still. The air smelled different. Not bad, just strange. The kind of stillness that usually comes after a major storm, not before one. Anna made shelf bread with powdered egg and some dehydrated hash. She set aside a portion for the greenhouse. If we lost power long-term, we'd need to think about compost heat and nutrient recycling. She'd already covered the glass with shade cloth to prevent silhouettes from showing at night. The side windows were taped with blackout plastic. Not just for wind anymore. We stayed inside most of the morning. Mark adjusted the solar panel angles and updated the battery log. I opened the long gun safe and took inventory. 1 12-gauge pump, 200 shells. 1 lever action 30-30, 50 rounds. A box of 22, about 400 left. Not much for a siege, but this wasn't a siege. Not yet. I didn't hear anything new from the radio until late afternoon. Then another repeat. Same loop, but now with a tone before it. Almost like they were trying to wake people up, make them listen even if they weren't paying attention. I tried calling Ron again. No answer this time. I tried a couple of other numbers, including a guy I worked storm response with 2 years ago. I left a message. Let me know what you're seeing. Still up on the ridge. Holding for now. I didn't expect a reply. Anna spent the evening organizing the root cellar shelves. She rotated everything with expiration dates, then made space in the lower left corner for a bag of coal she found behind the barn. She said we could use it for a heat barrel if needed. I nodded, said good idea, then went upstairs to double-check the attic hatch latch. We ate canned stew cold, no generator. I wanted to see how far we could stretch it without needing power. Mark didn't complain. Nothing happened overnight. No bells, no lights. The radio went dead just after sunrise. I rotated the antenna, thinking it might have gotten knocked loose, but there was no signal. I made a decision not to use the generator again for at least 2 days. Solar only. I wanted silence outside. I didn't want to attract attention if anything had wandered close. The ridge kept us hidden from the main road, but sound traveled through the trees too easily. Mark replaced one of the fence line batteries with a fresh solar bank we'd stored for the greenhouse expansion. I had him reposition it at the barn end so we could see better if anything came from the lower slope. Anna added new strips of aluminum foil to the bell line to catch more wind noise. That way we'd know if a false ring was caused by weather or not. We agreed to keep the house on night protocol all day, blackout curtains drawn, no lights, no stove, just movement between shaded areas and rooms without windows. It felt like we were rehearsing for something that hadn't arrived yet, like we'd done everything right, but had no idea if it mattered. Around mid-morning, I checked the kitchen windowsill again. It hadn't moved, but I felt the need to push my palm along the latch one more time. The blackout curtain was stiff from the heat, but I didn't open it. The light outside was brighter than I expected given the clouds, and I didn't want any silhouettes cast into the tree line. I moved back through the hallway without speaking. Mark was in the den, working on the schematic for the greenhouse power reroute. We kept a spare solar controller and a few unused panels in the barn, and he had been drawing up plans for how to isolate the greenhouse on a separate line. He said if we ever had to shut off the main bank, the plants could still run fans and drip lines for a few hours each day. I told him to run the numbers, but not to touch anything yet. We needed to conserve all the watt hours we had. Anna was in the root cellar sorting the older supplies. She'd pulled a case of canned lentils from the back wall and was checking the seals. I asked if she'd seen any weevils in the last few bins of rice. She said no, but added a few more mylar bags to the airtight drum just in case. I could hear her shuffling jars from one shelf to another, methodical like always. There wasn't any news on the radio that afternoon, just a long carrier tone, then silence. I rotated the band knob back and forth and caught pieces of a distant station repeating instructions. It was the same loop as before. Shelter in place, avoid hospitals, isolate if symptoms develop. That word kept coming back. Symptoms. But no one ever listed what they were. It was always said like a warning with no detail. I tried to pick apart what they weren't saying more than what they were. By early evening, the silence outside felt heavier. No cars on the gravel road, no animals near the coop. Even the squirrels had stopped making their usual racket. Anna stood near the back door with a basket of dry herbs she'd clipped from the greenhouse before we sealed the back wall. She didn't say anything when she came back in, but she locked the door behind her even though it was still daylight. I logged it in the whiteboard notebook without being asked. We had always trusted the house. Every screw in the frame, every window latch, every fuse box and cutoff switch had been installed with storms in mind. But this wasn't wind and rain. It was something else. Something slower but just as capable of pushing through weak spots. I spent the rest of the evening checking for gaps we'd never worried about before. Vents, crawl space louvers, drain traps. Anything you'd never think twice about in a flood, but that might carry risk now if something got close enough and started pushing. The light stayed off all night. We moved between rooms using red-filtered headlamps and signaled before entering hallways. No sudden movements, no raised voices. It wasn't fear yet, not exactly. It was caution being stretched thin, tested in silence. Day 5 started like the last one ended. No news, no noise. We went ahead with a perimeter sweep just after sunrise. I didn't expect to find anything, but I needed to walk the line and confirm. I wore the gloves and mask, even though no one had gotten close yet. The cattle panel fence on the south end had shifted slightly where the slope turned. Nothing major, just some settling after the last rain. I called Mark over and we added a diagonal brace post. He said we should put standoff barriers in front of the lower windows, just in case. I agreed, and we marked it down on the taskboard. I wanted everything built by the weekend. I watched the edge of the forest for a long time that afternoon. Nothing moved, but the longer I stared, the more I felt like the silence wasn't neutral. It felt deliberate, like everything out there was holding its breath. I didn't share that with Anna, not because I was hiding anything, but because I wasn't sure how to put it in a way that didn't sound like paranoia. We turned on the generator for exactly 1 hour. Mark handled the switch, and I stood near the exhaust barrel with the water extinguisher, just in case the blanket shift had loosened in the storm shed. Everything functioned normally. We ran the well pump, cycled the fridge, charged the battery backup packs, then shut it down again. I noted 3 faint pings from the southern trip line about 20 minutes after we started. Could have been wind, could have been a deer. I didn't investigate until it was fully dark, and by then it was too late to track. Anna cooked rice and powdered chicken broth on the alcohol stove. No flame, no sound, just enough to warm the meal. We ate with the inner windows covered and the lights off. The house smelled like antiseptic and old wood, the way it does when everything is sealed too tight for too long. Before we slept, I checked the safe again. All firearms accounted for, ammunition dry. Keys back in the secondary box. I considered staging another weapon near the attic hatch, but decided against it. I didn't want Mark finding it before he was ready. Day 6 started with wind. Not much, but just enough to rattle the south chimes. I walked the fence line with the .22 slung over my shoulder and the pole hook in my hand. I didn't see anything unusual. The tripwires were intact. One of the bait cans had been dragged from the compost pile, but didn't show any clear prints. Could have been a fox or raccoon. Could have been someone testing boundaries. I bagged it and brought it in for bleach wipe down. We spent the day reinforcing the door skirting. Anna screwed in a series of steel mesh barriers over the lower vents. Mark cut lumber to mount over the interior base of the front and back doors. We weren't sealing ourselves in yet, but we were narrowing the points of failure. I kept looking at the gravel road out front. Still no cars. Still no dust trails. Still no mail. The radio picked up one station just before noon. It wasn't official. Sounded like a repeater from someone running a ham set. A man said they'd blocked the causeway into Beaufort and weren't letting anyone in or out. Claimed he saw trucks moving toward the high school with cots and bottled water. I tried to call back on our set, but the signal was too weak and the modulation was off. I logged the details in the book and marked the frequency for later. That evening, I finally burned the 3 cloth rags we'd used wiping down the fence bait and the tool handles. I used the barrel near the orchard gate. Flame stayed low, no smoke, but I kept my hand on the fire blanket the whole time anyway. It's not the kind of thing you take for granted when the grid's half dead and no one's coming to help. Anna asked me how much diesel we had left. I told her a little over 200 gallons. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she just nodded and went to make more room in the pantry. On day 7, I heard the first gunshot. It was far off, maybe a mile or more, but the sound came through clean. One shot, then nothing. I stood still for 5 minutes, just listening. Nothing followed. No vehicles, no shouting. Just wind. I logged it. Time, direction, and no second report. Mark was working in the tunnel at the time and didn't hear it. I didn't tell him right away. That afternoon, I finally reinforced the barn hatch. The tunnel door had a good seal, but I added another bracket lock on the inside and re-welded the hinge plates with the portable torch. It took longer than I planned. The welds weren't pretty, but they'd hold. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. Maybe I didn't want to admit we'd need the tunnel for more than just weather. Anna planted the last of the sprouting potatoes in the raised bed near the south fence. She wore gloves and a filter mask, even though no one had been near the area in days. When she finished, she sat on the porch for a while and didn't speak. I brought her a quart of well water and didn't press. We held family review just after sundown. Not formal, but enough to go over the rules again. Generator hours, light protocol, fence patrols, radio times. Everyone spoke. No arguments. No complaints. Just agreement. That mattered more than anything else. Afterward, we didn't turn in right away. Instead, we sat in the den with the red headlamps on, sharing a single thermal blanket between us, while Mark adjusted the battery drawer for the night cycle. The room smelled like dry concrete and antiseptic from the bleach mop I'd used earlier that day. Nobody said much after the review, but no one left either. Sitting together made it easier to accept the quiet. By the time I did my last check of the south side, the air was colder. The clouds had thinned out sometime during the night, and there was moonlight slipping through the trees above the ridge. I moved with the .22 slung across my shoulder and the heavy gloves still on. Even though we hadn't had any visitors, I kept the pole hook close, not because I expected something to come through the fence, but because I no longer trusted the idea that we were isolated. Day 8 started with heavy dew and a grey sky. The solar panels were fogged over, so I wiped them down before first charge. Mark met me outside near the corner fence. He was already holding the toolkit and said one of the panel brackets felt loose in the night wind. We checked it together and reinforced the bolts with washers and a fresh set of locking nuts. I told him he did the right thing flagging it early. I didn't have to explain why redundancy mattered more now than ever. By mid-morning, we had just enough power to run a 30-minute charge cycle on the freezer. The draw was sharp, so we shut down everything else while it ran. I turned off the hallway sensor, pulled the main cutoff to the back half of the house, and left only the front panel live to keep the charge steady. While it ran, Anna stayed near the circuit board with the voltmeter. I trusted the system, but not enough to leave it alone. If something surged, I wanted a manual response ready. When the generator hour came later, we waited 10 minutes after startup before beginning the water draw. I didn't want to run the well pump and the fridge simultaneously. The battery monitor blinked yellow on the 3rd minute, which meant we were pulling close to threshold. I cut the lights, redirected the well into passive fill, and let the fridge cycle complete before restarting the water run. It worked. The tanks hit 98%. Not perfect, but enough to give us breathing room for the next 2 days. The radio picked up a single voice during the late afternoon slot. It wasn't automated. This one was human, male, probably middle-aged, transmitting from the coast. Sounded like somewhere between Charleston and Savannah. He wasn't reading alerts. He was relaying messages from people trying to contact family. Most of them were one-sided. If anyone sees Miranda Delaney, tell her Thomas is still at the fire tower. Joseph from Bluffton, your uncle is okay. He made it to Laurel Ridge. That sort of thing. He never said the word Walking Dead. Never said infection. But he mentioned barricades. He mentioned military roadblocks that weren't responding anymore. And he mentioned seeing a group of things, not people, was the phrase he used, wandering near a collapsed traffic light on Highway 21. We listened to that message twice. I took notes in the logbook and circled the phrase "not people" 3 times in red. That night, I slept near the mudroom with the shotgun at arm's reach. I left the radio on with the volume turned low in case something new came through. I didn't dream, or if I did, I didn't remember it. On day 9, the wind shifted hard toward the north. I felt it before I saw it, cold and fast, cutting across the ridge from a direction that usually meant weather change. The chimes on the east line rang twice around mid-morning. Mark and I walked the perimeter. Nothing was down, no signs of crossing. Still, I reset the trip lines and repinned the warning markers along the slope. I made sure every gate was double-latched, and I walked back through the greenhouse to confirm the blackout cloth hadn't come loose in the gusts. Anna spent the morning in the barn, rearranging the supply barrels and resealing one of the cracked lids on the feed bin. She told me afterward that she heard something near the tree line, like a soft footstep or shifting gravel. She didn't go check, just froze in place, waited, then backed into the barn and locked the door behind her. When I asked her to show me where it happened, she didn't hesitate. We walked to the spot near the ridge path, just before the bend where the slope curls toward the lake road. No fresh prints. The soil was hard and dry, but I didn't question her. She wouldn't have said anything unless she was sure. I marked the area with survey tape and told her we'd move the deer camera over to that side tomorrow. Later that afternoon, I changed our rules. Up until that point, we'd only allowed one person outside the main structure at a time, with someone inside monitoring. From day 9 forward, I told them we only went out in pairs. No exceptions, even for trash burn or compost. We ate early that night. Rice, lentils, powdered gravy. Mark added 2 tablespoons of protein mix to the pot to stretch it. The taste was awful, but it was warm, and it kept our calorie count stable. We ate in silence and didn't use lights, just the warmth from the stove and the red lamp above the pantry. Before sleep, I repositioned the 22 and hung the bolt cutters near the back door. I didn't want to admit I was expecting to need them, but I wasn't going to pretend otherwise either. Day 10 was quiet, too quiet, no wind, no rain, no animals. I stood on the porch for almost 20 minutes after breakfast just listening. I could usually hear insects or squirrels or wind through the pine tops. Not that morning. Everything felt like it was holding still. We checked the cameras. Nothing on the north feed, no motion alerts. But the battery on the west camera had died sometime during the night. I swapped it and took the memory card to review later. Mark offered to handle playback. I let him. He had a better sense of time spacing, and he liked cataloging data. It gave him something to focus on. Anna spent most of the morning adjusting greenhouse insulation. She'd started testing heat retention using water barrels and a mylar cover draped over the back wall. If it worked, we could extend crop life into cooler nights without drawing from the solar array. She logged everything with a grease pencil directly onto the wall so she didn't need a clipboard. I liked that. Simple, durable, and visible to all of us. That afternoon, Mark called me into the den to look at the camera footage. Around 3 in the morning, the Westline feed had recorded a faint shape at the edge of frame. No facial detail, just movement. Upright, slow. One figure. It paused at the edge of the camera's reach and then turned out of view. Could have been a person. Could have been someone lost. Could have been one of them. We increased night watch from 1 hour to 2, staggered between all of us. I took the midnight to 2 shift. Anna handled dusk. Mark covered the early morning, from 4 to 6. No exceptions. If anyone missed their slot, we'd all review the logs the next day and discuss why. That night, I sat by the south-facing window with the 22 across my lap. I kept the light off. I didn't move much. I kept my eyes on the tree line and waited. I didn't see anything, but I didn't stop waiting either. Day 11 began with static, the kind of static that fills up every empty room, especially when you've been listening too long. The radio loop was still playing, but the voice had changed. Female now, less calm. She misread a line twice, corrected herself once, and then moved on without acknowledging the mistake. That told me more than the words did. We rotated battery charges early, full solar day expected. Mark did a line clean on the inverter and shut down the tool shed breakers, just in case a voltage spike from yesterday's dead feed had lingered. I watched him work from the barn loft. He didn't rush. Every connection he touched, he double-checked. That kind of focus didn't come from panic. It came from pressure. Anna harvested 6 trays of microgreens and reseeded the beds with new lettuce. She said if we kept going at this pace, we'd have consistent edible yield in 14 days. I told her good work. She didn't smile, but I saw the tightness in her jaw ease a little. That evening, I saw something at the base of the trail. Far out, maybe 70 yards beyond the trip line, near the first tree bend. A shape. Still, upright. Could have been anything, but it stayed too long. Didn't move like a person would. I didn't shoot. I just watched it. Waited. And then it was gone. The morning after, I didn't mention it to Anna or Mark right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wasn't sure it mattered yet. There was always a chance it was nothing. Someone lost in the woods. A poacher, maybe a hiker, who had no idea how far out he'd gone. But in the back of my mind, I already knew that wasn't true. I'd seen the posture. I'd seen how it stood there, not facing us, not moving with any purpose, just existing at the edge of our line. I went out with Mark just after sunrise, and we walked the south fence together, double-checking the tripline anchors and solar cable feed. The west-facing camera was still online, battery reading 86%. No new movement logged during the night, just shadows moving from wind. But there was something strange. Small breaks in the tall grass west of the ridge path. Not flattened, not trampled, just interrupted. Enough to tell me someone or something had passed through without bothering to hide it. Mark didn't spot it, and I didn't point it out. I marked the location in my head, walked another 10 yards out, then turned back. The wind was in our favor, coming down slope, which meant we'd hear movement easier. I figured if anything was out there, it hadn't committed yet. That was the line I was still holding on to. Whatever this was, it hadn't made the decision to come closer. The rest of that morning we kept busy. Anna cleared space in the cold pantry, and moved 2 bins of preserved squash from the root cellar to give us easier access. We were going to switch to shelf-stable carbs only starting next week, just in case the greenhouse production needed time to catch up. That meant saving the canned goods and heat-sensitive items for later, when the weather turned and solar became less reliable. Mark finished his reroute diagram for the greenhouse solar system and submitted it for review like we'd taught him. He drew it in permanent marker across the top of the old breaker panel cover, which I appreciated. No scrap paper, no getting lost. Just fixed in place, visible for everyone. Around 3 in the afternoon, we heard something. Not close, but not far either. It came from the east. A sharp, distant snap. Wood breaking, not like a falling limb. Shorter, more sudden, like a foot on a dead branch. I froze on the porch. Anna was just inside, washing something at the utility sink. Mark had gone into the barn to check the greenhouse tap line. I didn't move for almost a full minute. Then I stepped back inside and picked up the 12 gauge. I kept it angled low, safety on. I didn't call anyone. I just walked quietly through the hallway and watched from the side window slit we'd cut last year when testing blackout procedures. The forest stayed still. No birds, no rustle, no wind. Nothing moved for the rest of the day. On the 13th day, we saw our first infected. It happened in the late morning. I was in the barn, refitting the hinge on the tunnel hatch with a fresh bolt. Mark was inside, logging solar efficiency from the last charge cycle. Anna was pulling winter starter trays from storage. Everything was routine, quiet. Then she called my name. Her voice wasn't loud, but I heard the edge in it. I stepped out of the barn and looked where she was pointing, down toward the open slope behind the compost trellis, where the trail dipped. A man was walking across the field. He was alone, upright, moving slowly. Looked like a hiker from a distance. He had a large frame pack, sun-bleached clothing, stiff gait, not limping, not dragging a leg, just off. I couldn't place what was wrong at first. I thought maybe dehydration, sunstroke maybe. Then Anna called out again. Just a short, startled exhale of my name. Nothing loud, but it was enough. The man stopped, turned, and looked directly at us. That was when I knew something was wrong. He didn't wave, didn't call out. His head moved too slowly, like the neck didn't quite respond right. His jaw hung slightly open, but not like he was about to speak. More like it had lost tension. He began walking again, this time toward us. Not running, not yelling, just that same steady pace, straight line, no hesitation, no checking footing. I raised the 12 gauge and shouted at him to stop. I didn't scream it, just a hard warning, enough to wake any living person up. I repeated it, same result. No pause, no recognition. When he hit the edge of the fence line, I aimed directly at center mass and gave him one more warning. Still nothing. He kept walking like the fence wasn't there, like he didn't see it. I fired. The round hit high on the chest, close to the collar. It knocked him off balance, but he didn't fall. He staggered sideways, then regained footing and continued moving forward. I fired again, this time center head. He dropped instantly. Mark came running out from the side hallway. Anna stayed behind the door, holding it half open. I told them both to stay where they were, then walked down the slope alone. The wind was still. The bells didn't move. The man's body lay on its side, head turned away. Blood pooled, dark and slow. I approached from the left, keeping my back to the slope. No movement around. No signs of others. I circled the body and looked down. That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. His eyes were open, but they weren't blinking. Not even once. The pupils were blown wide, bloodshot, clouded. His skin had ruptured in patches near the throat and lower jaw, like lesions or bite marks. There was a large open wound on his right forearm, torn, not cut. The flesh looked necrotic. The smell confirmed it. I took 3 steps back and raised the shotgun again. No movement. He wasn't coming back. I stayed there for 5 minutes before I moved. When I returned to the house, I told Mark to close the interior door and wash down everything he'd touched. I told Anna to start the decon protocol and prep the mudroom in case I needed to strip. I didn't bring the pack in. I didn't search the body. I left it there. Anna burned my gloves in the barrel. I changed clothes on the mudroom tile and sealed everything I'd worn in a bleach bag. I didn't let myself sit down for over an hour. The rest of the day we stayed locked tight. I reinforced the cattle panel with another support post. Mark added fresh warning markers and strung an extra trip line at knee height along the back slope. We ate cold canned beans and shelf bread, then reviewed the footage from the barn camera. It had picked up the figure roughly 20 minutes before Anna saw him. The man, or what had been the man, had come from the direction of the lake road. No other shapes behind him, no sounds. Just that one steady path, moving with the sun behind him. I watched the footage 3 times. Slow, frame by frame, pausing at every corner turn. No hesitation in his movement. No visual response to obstacles. He didn't even look down when his foot caught on a root. He just kept moving forward, head crooked slightly, one arm stiff and hanging lower than the other. If I hadn't seen it in real time, I might have tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't anymore. Afterward, I shut down the monitor and walked outside to check the slope where he crossed. The earth was disturbed, but not like a boot print. More like something heavy had dragged the toes with each step. The grass was bent in the same direction, straight, deliberate, not random like an animal's. I didn't need more proof. This was no longer a hypothetical. This was movement from the infected right to our perimeter. That night, I pulled the lantern and marker board into the kitchen and updated our rules. Not just tripwire alerts and water protocols anymore. I added a full security escalation plan. Level 1, visual contact with unknown. Level 2, confirmed approach. Level 3, breach attempt or signs of group movement. Anna reviewed it and suggested we color code each stage and mount the board in the hallway between the den and the pantry. Mark added his own notes, quick references for who checks which zone during Level 2. We weren't treating this like a drill anymore. Day 16 started cold and overcast. We skipped generator hours entirely and ran on stored battery. I limited all charging cycles to just handheld radios and the medical power pack. No lights, no fridge, no pumps. Even if we needed them, we'd keep it dark for another full day to see if it made a difference. I wanted to make our footprint invisible to anything walking past. Mid-morning, Mark brought in the latest water reading. Tanks at 85%, tower tank still full. Rain catch hadn't yielded much, but we were ahead of schedule. He asked if we should start rotating the stored jugs from the root cellar. I told him not yet. Not until we were under 75. Everything depended on rationing fuel from here forward. Even water had to be strategic. Anna spent the day inspecting the perimeter barriers. She noted signs of rust on the lower cattle panels where last week's fog had soaked the bottom mesh. I handed her the wire brush and rust treatment without needing to speak. She knew what to do. We worked in sync without saying much. The 3 of us had developed a language of habits, shorthand for fatigue, stress, trust. You learn fast when every move matters. Just before sunset, I spotted a single shoe print in the gravel near the gate. It wasn't fresh, maybe a day old, but it wasn't ours. Not wide enough for my boots. Too shallow for Anna's tread. The depth told me it wasn't carrying full weight, maybe injured, maybe just cautious. Either way, it was too close. It meant someone had been right there, just a few steps from the outer panel. No tripwire bells disturbed, no signs of entry, but someone had stood there long enough to mark the ground, and then backed away. I rubbed the print smooth with my boot and moved back inside without mentioning it to the others. That night, I locked the interior hallway doors from both sides and added a secondary lock to the mudroom barrier. I staged one of the radios on the attic stairwell with the frequency locked to our emergency channel. No one said anything about the changes, but everyone adjusted their routines. On day 17, the radio came back online with a broken voice. It wasn't a news loop, just a transmission from someone calling out from a nearby town. Woman, civilian, sounded tired. She said something about a fire at a convenience store and blocked intersections. Said the dead weren't just in the cities anymore. Her voice dropped out halfway through a sentence, replaced by static. I kept the volume low but let it run. If she came back, I wanted to catch her next message. But she didn't. That was all we got. After breakfast, oats and powdered milk, we held a planning session in the root cellar. We used to call them sit reps. Now we just called it daily. Anna ran inventory on the growing trays and calculated we had a week before the next round of microgreens was ready to harvest. Mark suggested starting 2 new trays with compressed soil blocks, just in case the lights failed before germination finished. I approved it. He already had the heat mat battery slaved to the greenhouse solar feed. That afternoon, I set up a secondary bell line across the lower paddock. We'd been using the main line for nearly 2 weeks without any contact, but I didn't trust the pattern. Things were moving in the woods now. Even if we didn't see them, we'd felt it. The sound of footsteps at night, the drop in birdsong, the way even the squirrels didn't show up near the compost barrel anymore. Something had changed. Just after dark, we heard another shot. Not ours. Distant, west of the ridge. Just one. I checked the clock. 21:36. No follow-up. I logged the entry and circled it. On day 18, Eddie Nolan showed up. He didn't walk right up to the gate. We saw him coming from the upper trail path. Slow, deliberate. One hand up, the other holding something over his shoulder. I recognized the coat before the face. Brown work jacket. High visibility stripes down the arms. He'd worn it during the last big flood when he and I helped reinforce the gravel berm near the quarry. I told Anna and Mark to stay back and stepped out to the porch with the shotgun at my side. I didn't raise it, not at first. I wanted to see his eyes. He stopped about 20 feet from the outer gate and didn't move closer. "Jack," he called out, "I need help." His voice was rough, not panicked, just worn. He was breathing heavily, not from running, but from carrying something. On his back was a pack, smaller than mine, looked half empty. I didn't say anything right away. I stepped off the porch and moved to the edge of the corridor, just behind the inner gate. From there, I could see the girl standing behind him. Sophie, his daughter. She was maybe 16, same age as Mark. They'd gone to the same school. She wasn't crying, wasn't even blinking that much, just staring forward, face pale, lips pressed tight. Her left pant leg was torn at the ankle, but no blood that I could see. Eddie raised both hands. We tried to go, thought we could make it to the highway, flat tire near the overpass. Didn't see what was under the car till it was too late. Carla, she didn't make it. I felt it before I heard it, the tight pull in my gut. I didn't ask what happened to his wife. I didn't need to. I told him to stand in the white box between the gates. I unlocked the outer gate remotely and motioned for him to enter. He did, slowly, leaving the pack on the ground and stepping back. I sprayed the pack with bleach solution, sealed it in a contractor bag, and slid it into the isolation shed. Then I turned to Eddie and told him the rule: 12 hours outside, minimum, no entry until we're sure. He nodded, didn't argue, just looked tired. I set up 2 cots beneath the awning behind the barn, in view of the side camera and within reach of the tripwire bell zone. I gave them water, food, and a solar lantern. Sophie didn't speak. She just sat on the edge of the cot with her arms wrapped around her knees. Anna didn't come outside. She waited in the mudroom, prepping the bleach station and laying out the quarantine log. Mark watched the entire process from the attic window, tracking every step with binoculars. That night, I didn't sleep. Day 19. 0 symptoms. No fever. No visible wounds. Both Eddie and Sophie followed instructions, stayed in place, responded to check-ins, and submitted to temperature checks. I told Anna to prep the mudroom for full decon. I told Mark to clear the hallway and reset the blackout strips. I didn't say whether I was bringing them in. I hadn't decided yet. Before I could, The west tripwire rang. Not loud, just a faint jingle, one bell, followed by silence. I picked up the shotgun and walked to the window. Movement in the trees. One figure, upright, not rushing, not calling out, just moving closer. It wasn't Eddie, wasn't Sophie. I had both of them in the barn, visible from the attic cam. Anna was still in the kitchen sorting the isolation gloves. Mark had just come in from logging the night watch shift in the journal. This one was new. The shape stepped out of the tree line near the edge of the east slope. I shifted position to avoid glare from the inner curtain slit and watched through the corner window. The figure was male, average height, clothes loose and torn in a way that suggested movement through brush, not weather damage. There was blood on his right sleeve. Not dripping, dried, dark. His head tilted to the side every few steps like his neck couldn't hold it straight. He didn't look around, didn't blink, just walked a few feet, stopped, and then started again. Not like someone wandering, not like someone with purpose, like someone being dragged by something internal he couldn't control. I stayed where I was and watched. He moved slowly toward the tripwire line. I didn't want to fire unless I had to. If there were more in the woods, one shot could bring others. I crouched lower, aimed the shotgun just under the window edge, and waited. He stepped into the tripwire zone and the bell rang once, a sharp metallic jingle. He didn't react. No flinch, no hesitation. He stepped through it like he hadn't heard it at all. I stood and moved to the mudroom door. Anna met me there, already holding the bleach sprayer. I told her to seal the inner hall and wait for radio call before opening again. I stepped out quietly. Door closed behind me. Barrel low, eyes locked. The man had reached the second marker stake when I shouted. Short, loud, stop where you are. Nothing. Just that same slow forward movement. His arms hung down, stiff at the elbows. His head leaned forward now, tilted like his body was trying to pull it along. He crossed into the 10-yard line before I fired. One round, center chest. He stumbled, faltered, dropped to one knee, and then, against everything that should have happened, he started pushing up again. I fired again, center head. He dropped flat. I waited, 30 seconds, then 1 minute. No follow-up movement, no noise from the trees, no shapes in the woods. I walked out and approached from the left just like I'd done before. Wide arc, no direct line. He was dead, this time for real, skull damage visible, face slack, blood on the grass under his chin and pooling into his collar. His hands had deep scratches along the knuckles, like he'd been punching through something before he came. His boots had no laces, and his right ankle looked swollen. Not broken, just twisted and neglected, probably why he moved like that. I checked his shirt tag. No ID, looked like a store uniform, but the lettering had been torn off. I left the body where it was and returned to the house. Inside, I logged everything in the incident book. Time, location, shots fired, reaction to wounds, movement pattern. Everything was written down. We weren't just surviving, we were keeping track. Eddie didn't ask what happened. He saw it from the barn. Sophie had her eyes closed when I passed by. Not asleep, just not looking. That night we reviewed the perimeter again. Mark walked the entire east line with me. I had the 12 gauge. He had the pole hook and headlamp. We reinforced the tripwire junction with heavier twine and added a secondary bell 10 feet in. If something got through the first without alerting us, we'd still have time to respond before the inner fence. Anna moved 2 cots into the hallway outside the mudroom. Eddie and Sophie were due to enter the main house the next day, assuming no symptoms presented. But the last 24 hours had changed things. I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Bringing more people inside meant more risk, but leaving them out too long sent its own message. We didn't sleep much that night. The wind picked up around 2 in the morning. Nothing serious, just enough to make the trees creak and sway. I sat at the front window with the 22 this time, saving the 12 gauge for emergencies. Nothing moved. Day 20. I called Eddie in just after first light. Not into the house, but into the secondary hallway. He walked in slow, carrying his own gloves and rubbing alcohol. I saw no swelling, no discoloration. Sophie followed. Her eyes were puffy like she'd cried herself out. They both stood still while Anna scanned them with the thermal wand and logged temperatures. No fever, no signs, nothing unusual. Anna led them through the bleach station. Outer clothes off, sealed bags, disposable gowns on. I told them they'd be under observation for 3 more days inside. No shared meals, no direct contact, separate utensils, separate sleeping quarters. Eddie nodded. Sophie didn't say anything. Mark moved his gear into the attic space for the time being. Anna set up a divider in the den for Sophie. We didn't talk much about what came after. Everyone knew this wasn't permanent, but we all needed time to see what came next. By mid-afternoon, Eddie had taken over the generator maintenance checklist. He logged the last fill-up, tested the baffle box airflow, and noted minor carbon buildup on the exhaust panel. He didn't ask for tools, just cleaned it with a brush and wrote the date down. It wasn't much, but it helped. I didn't want him sitting idle, and I didn't want the house slipping out of rhythm. Anna taught Sophie how to monitor seedling trays under blackout conditions. She used the south hallway storage lamps, red filter only, and showed her how to adjust water cycles by feel. No electronics, no light exposure. Sophie picked it up fast. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but her hands moved with purpose. That evening, I caught Eddie staring at the barn window. He was watching the slope where the last infected had come from. I asked him what he saw. He said he didn't see anything now, but he thought he heard something last night while they were still outside. Said it sounded like breathing. Close. Just past the tree line. He didn't check. Said he was too scared to move. I told him he wasn't wrong to freeze. Sometimes staying quiet saves more lives than fighting back. He didn't respond, just nodded and walked back toward the hallway. Day 21 opened with no new contacts, but something had changed in the air. Not a storm, not temperature, just pressure. We all felt it. That sense that we weren't alone anymore. Not just in theory, but in numbers. It was as if something had arrived, just out of sight, and was now waiting to make itself known. The radio didn't help. Every frequency was either dead or distorted. We picked up one burst of transmission from somewhere east, but the words were cut by interference. Convoy down, repeat, convoy, followed by static and then a long tone. Mark tried adjusting the antenna position and switching backup power cells. Nothing worked. We logged the coordinates and marked the time. 9:27. Frequency tagged for recheck at noon. That day, I walked the upper ridge alone for the first time in over a week. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The slope was muddy in spots. Old footprints faded, washed out. I didn't see anything fresh until I reached the trail split near the fallen pine. That's where I found it. A piece of denim, torn, still damp, with blood. I didn't touch it, just marked the spot with a paint flag and returned the way I came. My boots left clear prints. I made sure to step outside the line of the others so I could track my return. When I got back, Anna had already started the greenhouse warm cycle. Sophie was inside with her. Eddie had moved 2 barrels into place for the rain catch. Everyone was working. Everyone was calm. I didn't tell them what I saw. Not yet. That night, the wind picked up again, harder this time. Trees groaned. The bell lines shook once, then went silent. I opened the attic hatch and scanned the south fence with the long glass. That's when I saw it. Multiple shapes, not close, not moving fast, just there, dozens of yards apart, no clear formation, but every one of them was facing the ridge. I didn't count them. Counting would have made it real. I just logged the word and moved on. But something had shifted. They weren't just wandering now. They were appearing in small clusters, and even if there was no direct coordination, something was pulling them toward the high ground, toward us. That night, the pressure in the air deepened. I thought maybe it was the storm system I'd seen on the weather charts the week before, but it had stalled then, or so I thought. Around 2 in the morning, the wind dropped to nothing. An eerie stillness rolled in. Then came the first flash of heat lightning over the western ridge. It was followed 10 seconds later by a low rumble, deep and wide. We lost solar feed an hour after sunrise. The rain hit like a hammer. No slow build-up, no warning drizzle. Just sudden, thick sheets that slammed the house in pulses. It didn't let up. By midday, the entire south slope was a flowing curtain of water, and the clay trails turned into streams. The tripline bells rang continuously until the wind tangled the lines so badly they knotted up and stopped working. I shut the outer cameras down to save power and sealed the storm shutters. By evening, we had all 5 of us in the main house. The generator stayed on low, enough to power the kitchen and hallway, but we cut everything else. No radio, no outside light. The barometer dropped 2 full inches in under 6 hours. That wasn't just weather, that was a system collapse. Mark and I reinforced the attic window with old plywood shutters we salvaged from the shed. Anna added rubber seals around the basement hatch in case the runoff reached foundation level. Eddie helped transfer dry food buckets upstairs, and Sophie sorted the gauze and gloves again, laying them out along the inner kitchen shelf in case of emergency. The sound never stopped. No thunder anymore, just water, rushing down the ridge, hammering the roof, pouring in solid walls across every window. It was isolating, not in the quiet way, in the overwhelming sensory closing way, like being underwater without the pressure. By the end of day 23, the outer fields had vanished under at least a foot of standing water. Most of the garden rows were gone. The potato bins had collapsed under the weight. The greenhouse structure held, but the runoff spilled in from the hill behind and drowned 2 of the 5 inner trays. Anna cried when she saw the spinach tray floating against the glass. We couldn't burn anything. No chimney drawer in that wind. No safe venting. Even the emergency stove was out of use. We rotated protein bars and cold grains. Drank boiled water that we'd pre-filtered the day before. Every hour was rationed. Every movement logged. Every person checked and rechecked for symptoms, fever, injuries, or signs of strain. The infected didn't vanish. The storm didn't scatter them. It slowed them, drenched them, but some stayed. We saw one across the east fence around noon on the second day of the rain. The body was bloated, skin pale and glossy. It staggered through the tall grass with water sloshing around its knees. Its eyes were open. It didn't call out, just pushed forward until it slipped in the mud and got pulled under a shallow sink near the north wall. I thought it would drown, but an hour later, it was trying to crawl again. Anna said their lungs must be different now, that the virus, or whatever it was, had altered their tolerance for damage. She said maybe they weren't truly breathing, just moving, powered by something else. I didn't argue. She knew more about biology than I did, but it made me sick to hear. That night, the water reached the lower barn ramp. The animals were already gone, let loose back in week 1, but the space still stored fertilizer, fuel barrels, and backup wiring. If it flooded, we'd lose months of supplies. Eddie went out with 2 plastic tarps and a sledge. Mark helped him lash the barrels together and float them inside the upper loft. I watched from the attic through a narrow cut in the plywood. The rain bounced so hard off the roof I couldn't hear what they shouted, just the motions. When they came back in, soaked through, Anna stripped and bleached them in the hall before letting them touch anything. Sophie helped dry their hair. I logged the time. Day 24, 22:48. Status: flooded barn, stable house, no visible perimeter breach. Then, just after midnight, we heard it. Not a scream, not a roar, just a slow groan, long and miserable, echoing off the valley basin. It rolled in waves, distorted by the rain and bouncing off the trees like a siren. It wasn't animal, it wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't just one voice. Sophie covered her ears. Anna moved to the hallway door with the tranq pistol. Eddie froze near the sink and stared at the ceiling like he expected it to cave in. I raised the shotgun and moved to the back kitchen window. A figure moved through the water just past the fence line, then another, and another. Slow, dragging. Some with arms hanging loose, others half submerged. One had no head, still moved, still walked. They came in pairs and threes, their movement erratic but steady. No rush, just direction. They followed the waterline, not toward the house directly, but alongside it, like they were mapping the edges, like they were waiting. I didn't fire, not in that storm. I watched them circle the north fence and then vanish into the black trees. 2 minutes later, the groaning stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone cut a wire. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The generator hummed. The rain slapped the roof. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Day 25 came without sunlight. Just grey, wet, muffled light through swollen clouds. The water had receded slightly near the upper path, but the driveway was gone, washed out entirely. Anna recorded measurements from the gauge near the porch, 10.6 inches in 48 hours. I built a crude signal ladder from stacked bricks and a welded metal rod. Mark mounted it with the long-wave antenna and tried to re-establish radio contact. We got static, then a flicker, then silence. At 14:12, we received a burst from what sounded like a Spanish-speaking group. One word repeated several times. Cuarentena, quarantine, then static. That night, we checked every bolt, lock and panel. I pulled out the backup sodium lights and tested the field kit in case of emergency signaling. Eddie rotated guard with me every 3 hours. Sophie and Anna shared a cot in the hall just beyond the bleach room. I slept for 30 minutes in the attic and dreamed of water rising through the floor. Not metaphor, not fear, just water, rushing up through the boards and lifting everything. No faces, no voices, just the noise. Day 26 broke with weak light. The storm had moved east. The trees still swayed, but the rain was a trickle now. The field was a swamp. The fence lines had held, but the tripwires were tangled beyond use. No bells, no early warning. The cameras were coated in grime and would need full cleaning. But we were alive. We boiled water, cleared the kitchen vents, and used bleach on the floor where the outer mudroom had taken on sludge. Anna inventoried the remaining dry grains and vacuum-sealed 3 more packets from the emergency stores. Mark cleaned the shotgun barrel. Sophie relaced all the remaining boots and set them in the sun to dry. I walked the inner line with Eddie. The sun finally broke around 10:40. Warm, bright, harsh. The valley steamed. The scent was thick. Earth, mold, and something else. Something human. I didn't say anything. At the far end of the west ridge, we saw what the rain had uncovered. A body, maybe 2, tangled in tree roots. Bloated, arms raised. One had fingernails stripped clean. The other had a metal badge still pinned to the vest. Could have been police. Could have been someone impersonating one. We didn't check. Just noted the position, flagged the spot, and moved on. By evening, the batteries were back to half charge. The greenhouse was still flooded in one corner, but Anna said she could salvage the trays. We set the solar intake to max and resumed rations. 1 full meal, 2 light snacks, water every 4 hours. No alcohol, no sugar. The storm was over, but the danger wasn't. The infected hadn't left. They were just waiting for the next shift in wind, the next sign, the next sound. We waited. The ground stayed soft, uneven, unstable. The forest looked different now, richer in color but heavier. The trees held moisture like it had been poured into their bark. Patches of fog drifted low in the early mornings, and you couldn't hear birdsong anymore. Just the occasional drone of insects and the distant cracks of settling timber. The valley hadn't dried out yet, and until it did, the truck stayed parked behind the barn with a tarp over the engine block. It was useless in mud this deep, but the old motorcycle, that one still worked. I had fixed the Yamaha back in late winter, before the world fell apart. I told myself it'd be good to have a fast way around the property for storm damage checks. Never thought I'd be riding it through post-apocalyptic terrain, but here we were. A few years old, scratched up, but it ran. I ran it on ethanol mix from one of the sealed drums and kept the noise down by cutting the throttle low and coasting most of the way. I didn't want to be out there, but someone had to go. There was no more news from the outside. No functioning networks, no air traffic, no distant city hum. Just the forest, the water, and whatever came through the trees at night. I told Anna it'd be a short recon, out past the ridge, then loop around the fire road and back in through the rear timberline. If I didn't return by nightfall, she'd seal the shelter. While I was out, they worked the land, cleared the broken branches off the west fence, dug more pits, 1 meter deep, then covered with leaves and netting. They strung new signal lines with bent nails and tin scraps. It wasn't much, but in soft ground it could buy us seconds, maybe minutes. They also patched the upper greenhouse and replanted the trays that hadn't completely rotted. Sophie said the carrots might still survive if the sun stayed out long enough. The air smelled sweet out there, not in a good way, like rot disguised by sap. I passed a downed tree along the ridge and saw torn clothing hanging from one of the branches. No body, just a faded hoodie sleeve, ripped and twisted, caught in the bark. There were footprints nearby, bare, misshapen, some dragged, and signs of movement deeper into the woods. Nothing fresh, but it meant they'd passed through. A mile from the ridge, I cut the engine and coasted. The forest was dense, the old game trail barely visible. I climbed a small rise where the trees thinned and scanned the lower basin. That's when I saw the horses. 3 of them. No tack, no riders. Just running. Mud on their flanks, manes soaked, but alive. Galloping uphill, away from a pack of dogs chasing behind them. The dogs weren't infected. Not that I could see. Just feral, gaunt, fast, aggressive. They moved in bursts, snapping at the horses' legs. But the horses were faster, smarter. They knew the terrain. One of them slowed at the crest and turned toward me. A tall grey with a streaked white blaze across its face. I knew that face. Skye, one of ours. We'd let them go in the early days, freed them when the grain ran low, figuring it was better than watching them starve. Storm was behind her, the black gelding with the old injury on his back leg. He still ran, limping slightly, but holding his own. The third horse I didn't recognize. They disappeared over the ridge before I could whistle. The dogs paused, barked, and then chased after them, deeper into the tree line. I sat there on the bike, clutching the grips, wondering what the hell we'd been thinking letting them go. We thought we were doing the merciful thing, less mouths to feed, less attention drawn to the fences. But now I saw it clear. They weren't just animals. They were resources, mobility, range. If we'd kept them, we could have patrolled further, hauled supplies, moved faster if we had to evacuate. I made it back by late afternoon, told the others what I saw. Anna didn't say anything at first. She just nodded and went back to cleaning the solar panel housings. Later that night, when the power returned, she said maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe we could find them again. Mark offered to build a catch corral. Sophie said she remembered Skye's whistle command. It gave us something to plan for. The next day, day 29, we reinforced the eastern slope, used old rebar and fencing wire to create another fallback line. Not much, but better than nothing. Eddie tested the field lights. They still worked. Anna drew a new map on butcher paper and marked out places we'd seen infected. We logged patterns, estimated distances, counted suspected routes. By day 30, we felt stable. Not safe, not comfortable, but stable. The house was dry. The traps were in place. The water tanks were full again. The batteries had charged back to near peak. The perimeter wasn't perfect, but it was better than anything we'd seen out there. That morning, I watched the fog rise over the valley. I held the shotgun on my lap and waited. Nothing came. Just birds again. A few, quiet, cautious. We made it 30 days. Together. There were no headlines now, no broadcasts, no confirmed death tolls. But I didn't need them. I'd seen the truth in the water, in the trees, in the shapes that didn't belong. The world we knew was over, but we weren't. Not yet. We had food, water, discipline, purpose, and maybe, just maybe, horses again. I ended the day by writing one more line in my journal, same as I did each night before blacking out. We're still here, and we're still alive. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.